Hello, Mr. Allman here, and this is your Allman cast on the mammalian circulatory system. The broader prezi here is transport, and there are lots of very complex ways that multicellular organisms like plants and animals can transport a variety of materials throughout their bodies. The circulatory system is going to be the most important transport system by far in mammals because of just the sheer number of things that get transported via the blood. What's important in this Allman cast is to understand exactly how it is that the different types of blood vessels deliver the blood from one place to another, and how it is that the heart powers this entire system. As a quick review, blood is going to be what the circulatory system is transporting around. A lot of aspects of blood shown here are going to be more important for our study of immunology and maintaining of homeostasis, and so these are things that I'm going to skip over at this time. Do remember that the important component in terms of transport are blood plasma, because of the function of blood in being able to move water, dissolved ions, nutrients like sugar, waste products like urea and CO2, and proteins are all going to move through this liquid portion of the blood. The erythrocytes, or the red blood cells, are going to be the primary carriers of oxygen and carbon dioxide, oxygen being a necessary ingredient in cell respiration, and carbon dioxide being a byproduct that needs to be transported back to the lungs. That brings us more officially now to the mammalian circulatory system. So the circulatory system is going to be made up of the heart and all of the blood vessels, and the blood, which is the component of those blood vessels. Shown in diagrams, very common to see the convention of red meaning oxygenated blood and blue meaning deoxygenated blood. It is important to note that there is a difference in color, but deoxygenated blood is not blue, despite what the diagrams and despite what looking at your wrist may or may not tell you. The blueness comes from the cells on the surface of the vessel, and it doesn't reveal anything about the blood within it. Truly deoxygenated blood is going to be more of a deep maroon color, whereas oxygenated blood is actually going to be a bright red, such as the blood that you see when you get a cut and some blood is spilled out. The system here of pairs of blood vessels extends all throughout the body. The circulatory system is actually much more extensive than what you see here because the majority of the blood vessels are capillaries, which I'll cover that in a few minutes, and those capillaries are extremely small and too numerous to be able to show in a diagram. So what this particular diagram is showing is just the major branching arteries and veins. Arteries are mostly, but not entirely, in red, and veins are mostly, but not entirely, in blue. Again, we'll come back to the difference there. But I want to start here with the heart. So the heart is going to create a system where there are two circuits of blood. There's a pulmonary circuit. In the pulmonary circuit, there's going to be blood that is going to, here is blue, meaning deoxygenated blood, is going to leave out the pulmonary arteries and towards one of two lungs. Those vessels will branch into a bed of capillaries, which are going to surround the alveoli in the lungs. And it's at this point where carbon dioxide is going to leave and oxygen is going to bind to the red blood cells, in both cases by simple diffusion. Then the pulmonary vein is going to bring that now oxygenated blood back to the heart and into the left atrium. So that's going to be a full run through the pulmonary circuit. Now notice artery carries it away from the heart, and vein, the pulmonary vein, bringing it back towards the heart. Again, it left from the right ventricle and it's brought back into the left atrium. The left atrium is going to collect that blood from the lungs that now is oxygenated, and now it's ready to go through the systemic circuit, which is going to go everywhere else in the body. So there's going to be blood pumped out from the left ventricle through the aorta, and that aorta will then branch into many, many different arteries, some of which head towards the very top of the body and others heading down towards the bottom of the body. This part at the top and the very bottom are both part of the systemic circuit. There, again, the blood will branch off into capillary beds, which will exchange wastes, exchange oxygen, nutrients, carbon dioxide, and then all of that blood, after that exchange has occurred, will be brought back through veins into finally the inferior and superior vena cava into the right atrium, where then the blood is going to enter into the pulmonary circuit. So you get this figure 8 motion where it's going through the heart and alternating back and forth between the pulmonary and systemic circuits. It takes a minute for any one blood cell on average to make both circuits. So even though that this is a great distance that these blood vessels need to travel relative to their size, the speed that they're getting pumped through the body is extremely quick. There is an atrioventricular or AV valve that's going to be closed as blood is filtering into the right atrium. Then as the atrium contracts, it's going to push blood down into the right ventricle. That valve will then close behind that blood to make sure that blood does not go back in the heart. And then when the right ventricle contracts, it's going to pump blood up and out through the pulmonary artery. Again, the pulmonary veins are going to bring that oxygenated blood back into, here in this case, the left atrium. And then the other types of valves are the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are going to be closed when the ventricle is collecting blood from the atrium, but then will open when the ventricle contracts to allow the blood to leave, in this case, out of the aorta. The septum is going to be the wall of tissue that separates the left from the right part of the heart. There are also, not pictured here, but mentioned here at the bottom, are cardiac arteries, or the coronary arteries. Both of those are referring to the blood vessels which are providing oxygenated blood to the heart muscle itself. Right now we're going to cover the details of the heartbeat, how it is that the heart, through a series of contractions, is able to pressurize and pump blood all the way through the entirety of those pulmonary and systemic circuits. The heartbeat is going to begin in a small cluster of cells at the top of the atrium called the cyanoatrial node. The cyanoatrial node is going to create an impulse which is going to cause the contraction of the muscle surrounding the atrium. The muscle surrounding the atrium is fairly thin because the blood only needs a very, very tiny amount of pressure to move it from the atrium and into the ventricles below. Once the atrium have contracted, then the valves are going to close again. The AV valves will close, and then we have the AV node, or atrioventricular node, which is similarly going to generate an impulse, which is going to travel through a bundle of branches here that will then move down to the bottom of the heart, where at the apex, or at the tip of the heart, that muscle is going to contract first, and then that contraction is going to travel up the sides of the ventricles, so that blood is pushed beginning at the bottom of the heart and then towards the opening in the ventricle, which is actually back towards the top of the heart. So blood is really squeezed from the bottom and up out of the top of the heart, both on the right and left sides respectively. We can see that because these are electrical signals, by using an electrocardiogram on an EKG machine, we can actually measure those changes in electricity corresponding to the different parts of the heartbeat. Beginning with that first dip is when the SA node is stimulating the atrium to contract, followed by the larger dip, which is going to be when the actual contraction of the ventricle is occurring. So we get that lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub is going to be the contraction of the atrium, followed by the contraction of the ventricle in very quick succession to each other. The contraction of the heart is important in understanding the creation of blood pressure. Blood pressure is going to be the force by which blood is going to be able to leave the heart and travel to all the tissues of the body. And so a high pressure is needed to be able to get blood to be able to travel that distance. However, there is still a range in which that blood pressure needs to reside. If blood pressure is too low, then the blood won't actually be able to get to your extremities. And of particular concern is your head. And if blood pressure is too high, that puts a lot of stress on your heart and on your blood vessels. And there is a strong correlation between high blood pressure and poor cardiovascular health and heart health over the long term. Blood pressure is something that changes depending on the heart's contraction, which is why blood pressure always has two measurements to it. We have the first measurement, which is the systolic measurement, which is the highest pressure that blood is going to be at based upon the contraction of the ventricles of the heart. The lowest pressure is how low the pressure of blood gets at its dip at the very end of the, after the rush of blood has passed through, just prior to the next contraction. A Sphygmomanometer is a common device, or a blood pressure cuff would be the common term for the device that's usually used to be able to measure blood pressure. As you can see, the cuff, as it's puffed up with air, is going to close off the flow of blood through an artery in the upper arm. The gray line here represents the pressure that the cuff is applying. As the pressure drops when air is released from the cuff, then that's going to allow the flow of blood back through that artery. And so as the technician is listening to the sounds in that artery, the flow of blood is going to be registered in the stethoscope as a particular set of sounds. With the point at which the sounds are first heard, that's going to be the systolic pressure. As the pressure is further released and the vessel returns to its normal flow, there's going to be a point at which that noise stops and the blood is flowing normally. That's going to be the low, or the diastolic pressure. And so we get that 120/70 is going to be the ultimate blood pressure reading. The next important concept are blood vessels. The three types of blood vessels all differ in terms of their size, their structure, and their role within the circulatory system. So first we have arteries. We call something an artery if it carries blood away from the heart. Arteries are going to have a set of connective tissue, which is going to attach the artery to the surrounding tissue. It's going to have smooth muscle, which is the capability of contracting, and it's going to have the endothelium, which is that inner lining of the artery. Because it is so thick, arteries are the thickest of all the blood vessels. There's not going to be the movement of materials into and out of arteries. So there is no diffusion, for example, of oxygen through an artery wall. What it's there for is it's this large muscular tube that's going to have the ability to contract to control the flow and the pressure of blood. So if blood pressure needs to increase, the smooth muscle can contract. That will because it decreases volume, it will increase the pressure of blood within it. It can also slow the flow of blood by a strong contraction. It can cut down the amount of blood flowing to one particular part of the body. As the arteries branch off into smaller and smaller arterioles, they will then hit a bed of capillaries, which is the capillaries are going to be this very thin blood vessel, only one cell thick, and they are small in diameter, so they are wide enough for a red blood cell to pass through, but no wider than that. Because they have very thin walls, this is the place where materials are going to be exchanged. So we can see simple diffusion, bulk flow, different types of passive and active transport are happening to be able to ensure that nutrients get to tissues and wastes are returned back to the cell. Finally, we have veins, and something is defined as a vein if it carries blood back to the heart. So they are usually carrying deoxygenated blood that has already delivered nutrients to tissues, but remember also that the pulmonary vein brings oxygenated blood back to the heart, so that would be the exception. They have some muscle, but not as much as arteries, and so they have thinner walls than arteries, but certainly much thicker than capillaries. The blood pressure is very low at this point, so pressure is not enough to be able to actually deliver blood back to the heart. So they have a series of valves. These one-way valves will open up and allow the blood to travel back towards the heart, but then immediately close back so that there's going to be no backflow and there isn't going to be blood moving away from the heart. Otherwise, it would end up pooling due to gravity in places like your feet and your lower legs. You can see here diagrams showing the total area. So you can see the amount of space that they're taking up. So they take up a very low area in the arteries and in veins, but the number of capillaries increases the area that they're able to reach. The velocity of blood is very high as it leaves the heart. It drops and it's very slow as it moves through capillaries, which is helpful for allowing materials to exchange and diffuse across, and then it speeds up somewhat as it moves through those veins. And then finally you can see the pressure here. So the pressure is very high as it moves through the aorta and the large arteries, but then that pressure gradually decreases as it gets closer and closer back to the heart, which is why those one-way valves are so important. So finally, circulatory system disorders. There are many causes of cardiovascular disease, many treatments for them. Too many for me to mention entirely, but I did want to bring up a couple of things here just because of how important they are to understanding heart attack. So atherosclerosis is going to be a buildup of plaque and cholesterol on the sides of blood vessels, and the buildup of that is going to decrease the diameter of the vessel. Now, as you decrease the diameter of a blood vessel, that's going to cause an increase in pressure, and that pressure is going to be problematic over long periods of time. This is something that does commonly happen just with age in a lot of arteries, but more serious complications could develop, which I'll get to in a moment. A possible treatment for that could be something called a stent. A stent is just going to be some type of mesh that's going to be used to ensure that a particular blood vessel doesn't get more clogged than it already is. It's kind of going to consider it like a cage that's going to ensure that a blood vessel isn't going to actually become a blocked or clotted vessel. As you can see in the diagram here, as you move from left to right, from top to bottom, you can see that here we have a plaque building up. There are a number of other cells and protein structures within that plaque, but one major component that you need to be aware of is the role of LDL, or low density lipoprotein, also known as a type of cholesterol, and that how that amount of cholesterol is very significant in terms of building up the size of that plaque. So you can see the cholesterols that have combined together along with other cells to be able to make this big structure that the body is not capable, has really no defense to be able to clear it out. So that diameter is decreasing and decreasing, increasing the pressure of blood flow through it, which could cause damage to the vessel, and it's certainly cutting off the total volume of blood flow through it. Now, a couple of things, if untreated and if it is allowed to get worse, that could happen. The first of those is an embolism. So embolism is going to be the blockage of a blood vessel because of a clot. So you could have a coronary embolism, which would be a heart attack, where it is a coronary blood vessel that's going to be blocked, and because it's blocked with that blood clot, then there is no longer blood passing through it. So wherever it is that artery was supposed to deliver blood to is now no longer getting oxygen and nutrients, and those cells could die. And when a large percentage of cells in the heart die, that could throw off the system of the system of messages that's transmitting that signal to be able to contract, and so the heart stops beating. A cerebral embolism is going to be a stroke. So in this case, we have blocked off one of the blood vessels that is supplying oxygen and nutrients to a part of the brain, causing that particular part of the brain to die, and depending on its location, the actual symptoms of that can vary quite significantly. Treatment is going to depend on the nature of the blockage, but surgery is something that could be necessary, such as a bypass or removal of the blockage by surgery, and so that's something that we will see in the field trip. Finally, an aneurysm is going to be the failure of a vessel wall. In other words, this is when a blood vessel bursts. The symptoms are going to depend based on where it is that it's located, but we find that this is going to be most common in the brain. Something called the cerebral aneurysm is when there's going to be a stroke in which blood actually leaks out of a vessel and begins to pool in the brain. Leaking blood is usually not a problem because bruises are something that happen all throughout our body, and we have systems to be able to clean that up. But when it's within the brain, because of the fact that the brain is trapped in a finite volume, the leaking of that blood and the pooling of it inside the brain case increases pressure and can potentially cause further damage to the surrounding brain tissue. So that is the mammalian circulatory system. As always, take a look back at the Prezi, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.